Hello and welcome to this new episode of Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers podcast. I'm Matilde, I'm your host. I'm an inner transformation mentor supporting women in healing mother wounds through women's circles and through the one-on-one 10 weeks program. If you're interested and want to know more about these offerings, you can check out on my website, womenreclaimingtheirfullness.me. There's all the information there and every link is in the description of this episode. Now, today we're talking about parentification, and we're going to talk about what it is, the impact that it has on us as daughters of narcissistic mothers, and I'm going to share a few steps to work with this, to heal it. And let's dive in. This is a big topic that affects most of us as daughters of narcissistic mothers, as it is incredibly common when growing up with emotionally immature and unavailable mothers or parents in general. So parentification can happen in several situations, and some of the times this is due to it could be like parents that are properly not there, parents that have some level of illnesses, so are incapable of caring for their children. So it's not just something that happens only when we're talking about narcissistic mothers, but it does have a very big relevance when we're talking about narcissistic mothers. And today we're gonna talk about that in specific. So do you feel like you had to grow up too fast and you hardly remember even having a childhood? Were you the one who took care of a lot of practicalities at home when other kids were out maybe playing and doing what kids do? Did your mother confide her secrets and problems to you when you were a child? Did you feel like you were the only one capable of taking care of things in your family and that if you stopped, things would fall apart? Did you have to take care of younger siblings, otherwise no one would do it? If you've answered yes to any of the above questions, chances are you have experienced a degree of what is defined as parentification. And so maybe it's the first time you hear this word, or maybe you have heard it before, but what is parentification? Let's refresh and let's go through the actual definition of it. So parentification is a toxic family dynamic when the roles of parent and child are reversed. The child ends up taking responsibilities far beyond their age, compensating for what the immature parent doesn't do or can't do. And there are two main types of parentification: instrumental and emotional. Instrumental parentification is when the child has to take care of practical responsibilities far beyond their age, such as having maybe to cook for themselves, manage the house, take care of younger siblings, take care of themselves, and maybe even take themselves and siblings to school, for example, or to the doctor and so on, and take care of the parents. Now, this is if the parents are in a situations where maybe, sometimes they could be like abusing alcohol or substances. The child could be the one tasked to take care of them when they are in a position of not being able to take care of themselves and so on. So of course, we're not talking about in this, when we're talking about having responsibilities, it's important to understand that we're talking about responsibilities far beyond the age of the child. Okay, we're not talking about age-appropriate tasks here. So, of course, it is a good experience in a healthy family dynamic to give a child age-appropriate tasks for them to learn to be responsible and all of that. So that's all good, but here we're not talking about that. Here we're talking about the child having to completely sacrifice their own childhood in order to do the work that would be the work of the parents, and in this case, the work of the mother. So the other parentification is emotional parentification. This is when the child becomes the intimate partner of the parent. So it's not so much a practical help, but an emotional help. The child offers emotional support, maybe keeping secrets, becoming the confidant, becoming the mentor, even sometimes the therapist of the parent, and the child gets told about all the problem the parent has, and also the child ends up feeling responsible for it all, to the point that the child gets burdened with the emotionality of the parent. So we know that with maternal narcissism, that's a dynamic that happens quite often, that we feel burdened by being responsible for our mother's emotional state. And this can happen and being caused by this kind of dynamic when the mother is constantly being emotionally immature, and not for her own. We know that a narcissistic mother has her own trauma, her own story, and her own things. But whatever about all of that, the effect that it has on us is that, being emotionally immature, she can end up talking to the child about her issues, about her problems, about how bad she's feeling, and all of that. Maybe about even all the problems that she has with her partner, with her husband, that could be your father or not. That doesn't matter, but it all gets dumped on you, and it was dumped on you as a child, which is not appropriate. That is not what a emotionally healthy parent would do. So both scenarios are relevant to maternal narcissism, both the instrumental parentification and the emotional, and there can be a mix of two, so they're not so incredibly separate. There isn't a line that makes them incredibly separate. I have experienced both in my life, so it can be definitely a mix of two. A narcissistic mother may very well neglect her child, leaving the child to do all the tasks for themselves. I get plenty of emails about situations in which the child, now adult, constantly feels responsible for the emotional state of their mothers, having been the one the mother went to since childhood to dump all her problems onto. So we said that that's a very, very common thing. I've been the intimate partner of my mother for most of my life. She used to say actually that we were friends and somehow sisters more than mother and daughter. And as a young person, I used to believe that that was wonderful, as it made me important for her. I was very neglected as a child. My mother was never there. So the moment that I grew up a little, I'm still talking about childhood. I'm not talking about being an adult. I was still a child, but I was not a toddler anymore. She could actually talk to me in theory. She shouldn't have, but she was talking to me, and she was telling me all her problems. And she started this kind of relationship that, again, it was more like a one-sided friendship. And because I had been neglected so much, that was like the only way I was getting attention, and it made me feel all of a sudden important in my mother's life. And so I was very eager to be in that role, and I was always available for her. Didn't matter what else I was doing, I was going to drop everything to be available for her, to always be there, so that this dynamic could continue. So this caused, as you can well imagine, this was very unhealthy dynamic and toxic, and it caused a lot of enmeshment for me and confusion and a whole heap of problems in my adult life until I became aware of it. So that's just to give an example of what emotional parentification can look like. So what are some examples of how parentification with a narcissistic mother can look like? I'm being very generic with this episode. This is a big topic. I'll probably follow up with some more specific topics, and as in, like, I'm gonna go deeper in emotional parentification, because that's a big deal. We'll see what other episodes will bring on this, because it is a big deal, and it is something that happens. There's almost no clients that when I mention this doesn't recognize themselves in it. It's really something that happens to most of us when we grow up with a mother with narcissistic behaviors, narcissistic tendencies, etc. So what I'm going to offer here are just some scenarios that are typical of parentification with a narcissistic mother. Again, you might have experienced a mix of a few, or you might have experienced nothing like what I'm saying, but something similar. So again, take what serves you, see what resonates, and apply to your own experience. And if you have questions and if you want to share your experience with me, send me an email at mathilde@womenreclaimingtheirfullness.me, so that I can then answer your questions and maybe create an episode on what you're asking. So, first of all, as a child, a parentified child, you may have had to often care for your mother emotional needs, as we said. So maybe she was unhappy with her partner and told you all about it. Maybe she was depressed or unable to function in some ways, and you had to step in and take care of her emotional state. Maybe she told you how you were the cause of her unhappiness, and you learned very early on what to do to make sure she was fine, to just always micromanage her emotionality to make sure that she was not as unhappy, so that there'd be less consequences for yourself and perhaps for your siblings. Maybe she often told you she wanted to kill herself. That's something I've experienced very often. And you were the one who had to make sure she didn't go through with it. That you had to make sure that she wasn't going to be that bad emotionally, that it could go all the way to that. Maybe she had a complicated love life, and told you all about every heartbreak, or this could be like just with her one partner, or it could be like if she was moving from one partner to the next and telling you all about it, and she maybe was using you to console herself emotionally, going as far as maybe needing to sleep in the same bed with you and be very close to you, as a friend would be, but not a good friend, not a healthy friend, if that makes sense. Or maybe another scenario is, as a child, you had to take care of all practicalities around the house. Like if you didn't clean the place, maybe your mother would not, and the place would get progressively worse to an unhealthy level of dirt. Or maybe your mother would not go buy food, and you had to. And this could be for money reasons. She could be spending her money in other things, like maybe if she was addicted to substances or to alcohol, that could be very well where the money was going. And if you didn't take care of maybe rationing your food or going out to get food, or maybe even step in financially as a very young child, figure out ways to bring money into the household so that you wouldn't starve. That's another way that parentification could manifest. Another way is taking care of younger siblings. So we mentioned it in the above cases, but you could have had to be the one, maybe as an older sister, having to take care of your younger siblings as when your mother wouldn't. Maybe even siblings with special needs that really needed a lot of care. Again, I'm an older sister, and I get how sometimes it is part of growing up to mind your younger siblings, and there's nothing wrong with that. Here we're talking about having to step in altogether while your mother is not available and busy doing things for herself, and you are the one having to take over completely. So we're talking about a dynamic that is completely out of balance, way too much responsibility for a child, and maybe if you didn't step in, you were even punished, or simply no one would do it and your sibling would suffer, so you had no other choice. In the same way, you may have been forced to care for elderlies in your family, like your grandparents. Again, this could be like the parents of your mother, and your mother wouldn't take care of them, and sometimes they live in the house. They could have been living in the house together and stuff like that, and you were the one that ended up having, as a young child, to take care of them, either emotionally or practically. Another thing that can happen in the parentification is being the peacekeeper between your parents. So if your parents either were together or divorced, doesn't matter, but if they fought a lot and they were arguing a lot, so you were the one that had to mediate, that you had to step in and negotiate between them, making sure they would not fight, making sure they would manage to have a conversation or get along. That can also it's way too much responsibility for a child. Is not a child a role should ever have in their family, and I definitely know that from experience. I've had to do that. I was the one person negotiating between pretty much every member of my family, not just my parents, and it was very, very intense, and it's very, very toxic as a dynamic. So if that's you, I really, really get it. So these are some examples of situations where parentification occurs. If you resonate with any of this, if this has happened to you, first of all, before we go any further with this, I want you to know you're not alone. Not at all. And that this dynamic is a traumatic experience to go through. It is an invisible sort of a dynamic, as in, again, it's not like you're going to show bruises, but it is incredibly toxic and very traumatizing. So you haven't made it up in your mind if that has been your experience. It's not your fault. You've done your absolute best, and there wasn't anything else you could have done different as a child to actually change any of this. It wasn't up to you to change any of this. It would have been up to your parents that didn't. So none of it is your fault, and you're definitely not alone. As I mentioned, when I talk about this with my clients, I haven't met one that actually hasn't some degree experience a level of parentification, having grown up with a narcissistic mother or with both narcissistic parents. So how does parentification impacts you as a daughter of a narcissistic mother? What's the actual impact on us long term as we grow up with this? So there's a few signs that you may experience in your everyday life now that are a direct result of being a parentified child. One is being a caretaker at the cost of sacrificing yourself. So you become the person that takes care of everyone in your current life. This could be within your family. This could be still with your mother, actually with your narcissistic mother. It could be at work. It doesn't matter where, in what situation. You could have actually taken a job, a career that is in caring for others, which is beautiful, but you may be doing that completely out of balance, as in running yourself, exhausted, dragged, and totally sacrificing yourself and neglecting yourself just to take care of others constantly. Number two, being a people pleaser as the only form to get love and validation. You've learned that early on in life, and so you still do that now today. Number three, inability to play, relax, and take it easy. Having been in a position where you had to take a lot of responsibility as a child, way beyond your age, you've learned that doing things for just playing and for just joy was not available and was not actually a good thing to do, because in your childhood you couldn't do that. So still this can impact your adult life, where you actually don't feel like you're a person that plays. You might even define yourself as, oh, but I don't have fun. I am not a person that goes and has fun just for the sake of fun. And that can very well come from this. Number four, inability to delegate to others, because you can't trust anyone else to do it like you do it. And this comes at the cost of you being exhausted all the time, but unable to stop. So you are the only one that's burdened with doing it all, because you are the only one that can do it, and you can't rely on anyone. And I can so resonate with this. This has been the story of my life. So I fully feel for you if that's the story you're telling yourself. And number five, feeling like you have no support in anything you do. It's you against the world. Well, that's a variation of the one above, but both can manifest a little bit differently. Number six, feeling constantly unappreciated for your efforts. No one sees how great you are and all you do. And this can then move towards an energy of victimhood. Like, look at all that I'm doing around the place. No one sees me. I just keep on sacrificing myself and keep on doing it because no one else can do it like I do, but no one sees me and appreciates me. And that's a very, very unhelpful, a very unhelpful way of thinking. But again, it is an impact that we carry because of the childhood we've had. The next thing can be the constant need to be in control. Again, because you learned that not being in control when you were a child was not a good thing. Things went really wrong in your family if you weren't in control. So you kept needing to be in control even now. Number 8, feeling of guilt if you don't take care of things or if you do something for yourself, to the point that you actually never take time to yourself or do anything for yourself. Number 9, if there's conflict, feeling the need to be the peacemaker. So we mentioned that if as a parentified child you were the one that was keeping the peace in your family, maybe between your parents, that you were always going in if there were conflict, you can actually you might be the one that keeps doing that. You might do that at work, you might do that with your family, you might do that with your partner, and always trying to keep the peace, never actually express your opinions or where you stand because you want to keep the peace at all costs. And also this might make you conflict avoidant altogether. So if there is a conflict, if you've experienced a lot of that in your childhood and you were always in the middle of it, maybe you were even told it was your fault, you might now actually just try to completely be away from any conflict all the time, even when it would be necessary to actually express your opinion and maybe step in a little in a healthy way. You still avoid any sort of conflict. Number 10, feeling extremely validated when someone tells you how responsible you are and how great you are at doing the work of 10 people all by yourself. And I can so feel that. This was like the biggest compliment I could get, was like, oh, you're so mature for your age, you're so responsible, and you do in an hour the work that 10 people would do in 3 days. And I felt like over the moon validated when I was getting that, without considering absolutely what this sort of was doing to my health, which wasn't good. So again, I really feel you if that's what's happening with you. Number 11, unable to ask for help. Because again, you can't trust anyone to do things like you do. And also you've learned that there's no help coming your way, because when you were a child, there was no help coming your way. So why ask for it? Number 12, lack of boundaries when it comes to your mother's needs or anyone else needing your help. So if you get validated by helping everyone, if you get validated by pleasing everyone, by being the doormat, then goes without saying there's no boundaries. You have no boundaries. You're gonna run yourself rag, exhausted, serving everyone else, being the doormat, and you'll have no boundaries for yourself. And this can be with at work, in relationships, anywhere, and it could still be the case with your mother still today. Number 13, micromanaging everything. So that again comes from the lack of trust in others and the need to be in control. Micromanaging everything. This could be at work, in your house, could be with your kids, and that's exhausting for sure. Number 14, emotionally unavailable in relationships, or too available until you become the doormat. So both ends of the spectrum here might be the case. So because you've had to be the emotional support of your mother growing up with the emotional parentification, you might have had to do it so much that now there is a fear of being completely consumed by another person and being enmeshed and dragged in and sucked in their emotionality and become responsible for them, that you make yourself completely emotionally unavailable. And this might also be with your children. This might, this may cause a pattern repeat. Not because you're a narcissistic mother yourself, but because you've been through this, and this can happen. Sometimes we tend to repeat patterns. And all the opposite, you could just be too available. Again, because you want to please, because you want to avoid conflict, because you want to be validated and loved, of course, then you become the doormat in every relationship you're in. Number 15, hypervigilant of everyone else's needs, constantly neglecting yourself. Number 16, afraid of people asking too much of you, so refusing all responsibility. So up until now, we've spoken about being the doormat, being pleasing, doing everything for everyone else, being the caretaker. But what can happen is also the opposite. You can retreat because you've been asked too much when you were a child. So now the fear of being asked too much again. So you refuse all responsibility. You take no responsibilities at all in your life, in your job, anytime that there is a moment where you are given responsibilities, you back away and you just retreat. Number 17, being chronically anxious, fatigued, and filled with guilt. Anxious because if you have to be hyper vigilant, and also if there was never safety in your childhood. I mean, if as a child you needed to behave like an adult, there was no safety. So anxiety goes with that. And fatigued because you're running yourself, exhausted, doing everything for everyone, and filled with guilt if you don't. Number 18, feeling obliged to take care of your mother incessantly even now. So this dynamic of being her emotional support or her practical support may be going on still now. And although you now may have the tools and the capacity, you're an adult now, you're not a child anymore, to actually take care of practicalities and do certain things, but it's not happening in a healthy dynamic. It might still be happening with this obligation, totally feeling responsible, totally feeling like you owe your mother something constantly, and that you're a bad daughter if you don't, and this sense of guilt that is always there. No matter how much you do, you just can't stop feeling guilty all the time. And the last one is feeling the need for validation from your mother still today. So wanting to tell her all that you do, needing her to see that all that you still do for her, that you are there. Because very often in this parentification, so as a child, we don't actually receive any validation. So although as a child you were doing a lot that was way beyond your age appropriate responsibilities, you never were told that you were actually good, or maybe you were told, but it was only when you were doing things that were way inappropriate for your age. And this creates this dynamic that still now we're needy for that validation from our narcissistic mothers. So again, creating quite a toxic dynamic. So that was a lot, but because it does impact a lot, there's no other way to put it. So if any of this describe your experience, if you're feeling any of what I've just described in your life, again, you're not alone in this. I really want you to hear this first and foremost, because it's the biggest pain of having been through all of this, is to feel like we're the only one. We're alone and no one else can get it. And very often when we go talking to other people that have not been through these experiences, or maybe are not aware they have, because some people have been through this but they're not aware of it, then we feel very lonely, because we get weird reactions from people, and we feel really lonely. So you're definitely not alone in this. In my personal experience, I've been a pleaser. I could never let go of control over any situation. I micromanaged everything. And when I became a mother, I kept micromanaging everything, even with my daughters. Attempting to rely on someone, to me, for years felt like death. Like literally. If someone told me, oh, but I can do it for you. Oh my God, like, no. I was like, my motto was do it all by myself. I can do what three people would do in less time and better, and that's what I'm gonna do. I was constantly exhausted, but I couldn't stop. I truly believed that the world would fall apart if I took a break. That's how I lived. And all of this while constantly needing to make sure my mother was fine, that she wasn't giving into depression or trying to kill herself or making herself sick or whatever the story was at the time. And I thought I had to be like that to be a good daughter or a good person. I had no idea parentification even existed, as well as for a very long time I had no idea maternal narcissism even existed. So I totally get it if you have experienced any of these, and if you are beginning, like you're becoming aware of this now, or maybe you have for some time, but I get how intense it is to actually wake up to all of this and go, oh wow, that was my childhood, that was actually abusive, wow, and now what? I totally get it. And like that, I met so many women in this situation. So again, you're not alone, and none of it is your fault. Becoming a parentified child is often the only way to survive the situation you were in as a child. I mean, there's no choice in it. You had no choice. As a child, what choice do you have? If your mother is a narcissist that isn't actually taking care of the basic needs that you have, and you have to actually take care of her needs because otherwise everything falls apart, you have no choice in it. So it was a very wise way, whatever coping strategy you've been using as a child to go through all of that was a very wise way to get you to survive to here. That part of you supported you at times when there was no other way to cope. So you've done amazing. And that part of you has done amazing. And this is really important. Really, really important. That's not your fault, and you have done amazing. But now that part is not necessary anymore. Now you're an adult, and now you have a choice, and now you can be empowered to actually make your own choices. So that part of you that needed to struggle because that was the only way to survive is not necessary anymore. And that's where the healing happens. So if you have been through parentification, what can you do to support yourself now? And gently break the patterns so that you can live your life free from all of this and not feeling burdened with all of those things that we described earlier, all those wounds and impacts that this kind of trauma has. So there are a few steps. I'm gonna talk about 5 main steps, I believe. And there's one in particular that I haven't heard anywhere, so I'm particularly eager to share this with you. I've looked at a lot of material on this, especially when I started looking into it a few years ago, and what got me about how it's promoted around the place, the solutions that are promoted around the place, the main solutions that are out there are all about recognizing what you're doing wrong and fixing it. So I want to say, before we go into the steps, that really that never resonated with me. And so when I'm working with my clients, that's really never the approach. This whole thing that if you're not playful, if you need to be in control, if you feel like you can't relax and all of that those are wrong aspects of you that need to be fixed, and so that you need to force yourself into becoming someone else, that I really don't feel it's very helpful. And in fact, it's quite intense on the nervous system and is very re-traumatizing. So we're gonna go through these steps now, and it's a very different approach I'm bringing forward on this. One that I've seen works. What I do is result based. First of all, in my own experience, because if I haven't, by now, if you've been listening for a while, if I haven't experienced it, then I don't actually share it because, I believe in first-hand experience very much. And also, if it hasn't worked with clients, well, then it's not worth mentioning. So this works. What I'm about to share with you works. So the first thing is awareness. We start with awareness all the time. That's by now, if you've been listening to me for a while, awareness is where I start, because becoming aware of this dynamic is the first step. So becoming aware that parentification is actually a thing and that you have not made it up, first of all, that's really important. Because otherwise we're feeling mad. I get a lot of emails of people saying, well, I up until this point I felt like I was mad, and now I finally feel like I'm not anymore. Because it's true, when you're the only person, when you think you're the only person experiencing something and you're not aware that that's even a thing, you can feel like you're the mad one. And of course, your narcissistic mother and her flying monkeys are going to tell you very often that you're the one with problems and that you're the mad one. So first of all, becoming aware that that's a thing. It's really, really important. And then getting to know how this dynamic has played out for you. So becoming aware of that, it's very important too. So one very practical way to do this, to bring your experience into your awareness and the patterns into your awareness. So a starting point can be to write down an inventory of all the things that you had to do as a child that were beyond your age. All the things that were not actually appropriate responsibility for you as a child. Literally write a list. And this can be both things that you had to do practically and emotionally, so that you can have a look now as an adult at what your child self has been through and be very objective about it. It's something that is undeniable, and it is a thing, and you have been through that. Now, I know that this process can be intense, so you can do it a little bit at the time. You don't have to do it all in one go. Make sure you be very kind with yourself in the meantime. There is, remember, within the on the website, there is the free self-love guided practice that you can download, that you can access to. So if that can be a support, do something that supports your system while you're going through that. Maybe do it with a therapist or a guide, a mentor, if you need extra support. But that can be a really good first step, because it gives you a list, and then you have something tangible that when your mind wants to go through, oh well, no, that wasn't really such a bad thing. Maybe I've just imagined it. Maybe I remember it wrong. And maybe when your mother is trying to gaslight you and confuse you on this, you have that for yourself, not to read it to her or to tell anyone necessarily, but you have it and you know that that's what you've been through. So that's the first step, that awareness, knowing what you've been through and understanding those patterns is the first step. The second step is acceptance. And again, if you've been working with me for a while, you know that awareness comes first, acceptance always comes second. This is where you learn to be kind with yourself and accept all the parts of you that are at play. You may have become aware, for example, of how much you need to be in control. Okay, let's use that as an example. The solution is not to suddenly let go of control and see what happens, because that can feel, and this is, I'm referring to this because again, this is something that I've seen advised often. It's like, oh, if you're needing to be in control, why don't you just release control for a bit? Well, that's really lovely, but that's really, really hard to do. If someone came to me, and I can tell you they did, years ago, when I was like an absolute control freak, I really needed to control everything. I needed to know everything that was happening in my surroundings, in my environment, with my partner, with my children. I needed to control everything. And someone just told me, oh, why don't you just ease off a bit and, just go read a book and relax and let them do their things. That's not possible. Like, my system was not going to allow me that. I still remember there was a time I just had my second child. She was a baby, and I was in hospital there had been some little minor complications, so I had to spend a couple of nights in hospital with her. And some very lovely nurse came to me and offering me to take the child away from me just to the next room for maybe an hour, so that I could get some rest. Well, that was the hardest hour of my life. I could not rest. I actually ended up getting up after the hour was nearly over, but I give me my child back. I can't actually be away and not see what's happening to her, not even though rationally it made no sense. Of course the child was absolutely safe, the nurse was just in the next room, everything was absolutely fine, and it was all fine. But that's too much for the nervous system. So that is an example to say, this whole thing of take a part of you, make it wrong, and then just try and do the opposite, that's really, really, really intense, and it's not helpful for the system. So if the example we're using is that you need to be in control, the solution is not suddenly letting go of control. It can trigger a lot of anxiety, and it can get very intense. It can actually trigger panic, overwhelm, the whole trauma thing, everything. So it is important to come to accept that part of you that needs to be in control. First of all, accept it, love it for what it is, an incredible coping strategy that has supported you up until now, and gently learn tools to self-regulate, eventually allowing your system to feel safe, to let go of control where it is not necessary. So it is a process. I had to, and it can't be done in one go. I had to learn to self-regulate my system, and then it happens naturally. As you learn to self-regulate, it happens naturally that you'll find you're less in need of controlling everything. But not because you're shaming that controlling part of yourself and you're fixing it, but because by self-regulating, those waves of anxiety and the trauma responses are not that strong anymore. And so you can actually naturally let go of that control. So it's a completely different process. One is re-traumatizing of the nervous system, and the other one is actually healing. Okay? So it is very important not to try and fix yourself. As I said, there are many people that would say you have to do that. You know, if you're not playful, well then be playful. If you're always anxious, well then relax. If you have to do it all yourself, then force yourself to delegate. Doesn't work like that. This fixing approach, in my own experience, and I see it with clients all the time, they come to me going, oh, up until now, this is what I've been told. I have observed that is really damaging, actually, and not good at all. So all these fixing strategies, I have not seen them having a long-lasting success. Accepting all parts of you and gently learning to mother yourself in a way that feels nourishing and safe for your nervous system is the only way that I have seen working for me and also for others that I've been working with too. So I just wanted to make sure that this is clear. And if you have any questions on this, and if you want to share your experience on this, please feel free to send me an email at mathilde@womenreclaimingtheirfullness.me. So the third step then, once you have created safety within your system, you can gently explore ways to be more playful in a way that it's you. You can start practicing asking for help. Maybe for small things at first, you can start putting in your schedule things that are just for you. Time aside for yourself to do something that brings you joy or that is good for you. This is going to happen naturally. The more you accept all the parts and the more you work with those parts, the more you practice self-regulating and learn to mother yourself, these things are just going to happen. And then, of course, we can bring conscious awareness to it and make sure that they do happen. You know, there is a point where you can begin to put a healthy amount of effort to make sure that these things happen, but not as a fixing thing at the start, only when there is enough opening in the system for you to do that safely. And also, this is the time to start placing some boundaries for yourself, both with your mother and with others. So we spoke about that when you're when you put yourself as the caretaker of everyone or the people pleaser, when you need validation constantly because you're the one that does it all and all of that, then that part again has to be honored, is the part that allowed you to survive up until now. But that part had no boundaries, and so you probably still now have no boundaries in your life, healthy boundaries that support you in breaking patterns and in regaining your own life and control over your life. So it comes a time along this process where you want to start setting some boundaries around yourself. Now, I have 2 full episodes that I published just in the last 2 weeks on boundary setting, so you can go ahead and have a listen to that, and you can also download the free roadmap to boundary setting. The link is in the description of this episode. So again, this is a tool to support you in setting boundaries in an easy, clear way. So you can go have a look at that for this point. I'm not going to go deeper into boundaries right now, but those episodes are there, very clear and complete. And then there is the free roadmap to boundary setting that you can download. Step 4, and this is the one I was so eager to share with you because I haven't heard of it very often, and yet it's so amazingly good and it works so well. So any form of creativity, of creative art, it's a very good place to practice breaking the pattern of being the hyper responsible, serious, practical person that gets it all done and that only works and never relaxes and never takes time and never experiences joy. That kind of wound that we're carrying because of having been a parentified child needs a practice of playfulness, and creativity is really something that can help you with that. Even if you feel, because like I know right now you could go, oh, but I am absolutely not a creative person. What are you asking me to just sit down and make a drawing? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about practice creativity in whatever form that can come to you. And sometimes it can be helpful to even feel back into how you were maybe as a child, because although we have been parentified child, there were moments, because for a child that's very natural, when some little moments where there was something that brought you joy just for what it was, something that you may have liked doing, and then maybe you didn't have any chance to do and you didn't have time to do, or something that perhaps you saw other children doing and you thought, wouldn't it be lovely if I could do more of that? Wouldn't it be lovely if I could do more art? Wouldn't it be lovely if I could do music? Wouldn't it be lovely if I could bake decorated cupcakes? Whatever that is, like literally there is no specifics to it. It's whatever calls to your heart and to your soul, really. I recently, just a couple of days ago, I met a woman actually who said to me that she literally said, I lived so long with so many rules in my life. This was a woman in her 60s. That when I do music, I can feel all the rules go away and I'm free. And I thought that was such a lovely thing. And I totally get it. Being creative is one of the core feminine practices. As women, we create life. This is whether you have children or not, whether you're ever gonna even have children. Maybe you don't want to. That's okay. That's not the point. But we are physiologically, biologically, and emotionally and energetically geared towards creating life. We're equipped for that. So creativity can be very healing for us, because every time that we're creating something, we are going through that process of creation. It doesn't have to be a baby we create. It can be anything. It can be a meal. It can be something in the garden. It can be anything, like something that you do with your hands, like clay. I don't know, anything, any form of creativity is is healing for us. And it can come, as I say, can come through in many forms. I have been told very often that I could not be a creative person because I was so mature for my age, I was so practical, I was always responsible, I was so serious all the time. Clearly, I could not be a creative person. I didn't have the artist archetype in me, which was very hurtful actually, because I didn't feel like that, but I did believe it for such a long time. And it was a process for me to rediscover my creativity. It took years actually, and a lot of sampling and playing, and even doing things that, I've tried, maybe painting, and I've tried different things that actually were not for me. I have other ways to be creative. And then you can bring creativity in every aspect of your life. You don't even have to stop with one specific thing. If that's not for you, you can actually bring it in. I have an episode on this with an incredible guest that I had. That was nearly a year ago that episode was recorded, but it's still an incredible episode, and it talks about creativity actually and how to bring it forward into everyday life. So I'm going to put the link to that episode in the description of this episode if you want to go listen to that. For me, it was a process rediscovering my creativity, but I did, and I found incredible healing in it. And I see it with every client I have. It's really incredible. They never come to me with that as a main topic, but after a while that they're working with me, after a while it does just come. There is a point in the healing process where they start going, you know what, I used to love singing, or I used to love doing art, or I used to love collecting butterflies. I don't know, whatever it is. There's always something that wants to come back forward in as a creative endeavor. And when they start taking it back on, there's always immense healing that happens. So that's something that I wanted to share with you today as a step, because especially when we've been so responsible, so keeping it all together all the time, so always having to think about practicalities, so always having to do all the tasks that we need to do first, all the have-tos, and taking care of everyone at work, taking care of everyone at home. It's intense, and that's not how you're meant to live your life. That's not ever gonna be a happy, joyous life. And I get it that comes from the way you've had to grow up. I had to grow up really, really quick, and you didn't have time to be a child. So bring in that creativity in your life now, gently. Begin to play with it and introduce it again. Can be very, very healing. And then the final step, number 5, find support. Because that's really, really always part of it, is getting the right support. Getting the right support in a mentor or in a community where you can share your experience, where you can feel seen and safe exactly as you are right now. So no fixing needed, and no shame for what you are, for what you had to do, for the experiences you've been through. Lots of other people have been through the same experiences, and when you are in a container where you can share that, again, a lot of healing happens. Safety is really, really important for the nervous system to move from trauma responses and to break the cycle of the pain and suffering you've been through. So having a place where you get supported, that brings safety in your system, and that can really helpful. So just to recap, we've spoken about awareness of what parentification is, and awareness of the patterns, making an inventory of all the tasks you had to perform as a child that were way beyond your age, and get objective about it. Number 2 was acceptance, so accepting all the part of you, no fixing needed, and learn to self-regulate and learn to mother yourself and go through that process. Number 3, we were talking about gently begin to introduce the new behavior that you want to have, and also boundaries, which are really, really important. Number 4, play with creativity, see where that brings you, experiment, have fun. And then number 5, get support. Just to finish up with this episode that was majorly big, so thank you for listening and being here and doing the work that you're doing. You're not defined by the amount that you do. You're not defined by how much you manage to please others. You're not defined by the amount of responsibilities and tasks you pile on yourself. You've been doing amazing in getting to where you are right now, and that part of you that kept you alive is to be honored. Now, however, you can allow yourself time to gently heal so you can live from this moment on a happier life with joy in it. You can now gently get to know yourself and decide what you truly want for yourself, because you so deserve it. So with that, I'm gonna send you lots of love, wish you a wonderful week, and bye for now.